Okay. All right, so welcome to our last information session for parents of kindergarten 2022 students, and we are coming to the latter part of the term now, and as you know, we've got our first transition session tomorrow afternoon, which is really exciting. So tonight's session will focus on numeracy. It's probably slightly shorter than the one on literacy, which I guess reflects how much of our curriculum is covered by those different areas. And of course, English is throughout everything. Numeracy is to a large extent as well. But of course, it's near impossible to be numerate if you're not literate. So numeracy is obviously really, really important, but literacy is extremely important. All right, so before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are meeting today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to extend that respect to other Aboriginal people joining us today. All right, so you've already seen this one before, which gives us a bit of a breakup of what is covered when we are at school. And you can see from that pie diagram that literacy is the biggest part, and then the next biggest part or bit of the pie is mathematics. So mathematics obviously comes into things like science and to some extent even creative arts, depending on what you are doing. So it's one of the areas, along with literacy, that are, I guess, the key parts of what we do, our core business within a primary school. So you'll see that how that kind of fits together. So the key idea or the aim in numeracy is to develop children's number sense. So we want children to have a general understanding of numbers and of operations, and we want them to be able to use mathematics in a range of flexible ways and to make judgments. And of course, we also want them to have a big bag of useful and efficient strategies that they can use when they need to manage numerical situations. And that's obviously really important in life. If you're not numerate, you're in a situation where I guess you're vulnerable to being ripped off, essentially. And, you know, you don't understand even simple things like going to a shop and knowing the change, you know, understanding how much paint we need to paint the house, thinking about how much deck oil we need, you know, making sure that the interest rates are appropriate and that you're not being inappropriately charged. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why numeracy is really important, not just at school, but for life. So hot off the press, we actually have a brand new K-2 mathematics syllabus. And there are some key changes from our old syllabus, which I'll be able to talk you through briefly. But we also, at the moment, obviously, are following the current syllabus, which is the old one, and then we will be working towards implementing the new syllabus. We also work within what's called the numeracy progressions, which outlines the sorts of things we would expect students to need to know before they go on to the next bit. So maths is really cumulative. So if you miss a little chunk early on, it's really hard to then have a really good understanding of the things that come after. So it's really important part of our job to make sure that all of those little building blocks are in place. It's like the foundations, if you like. So particularly in K-2, it's really important to get those things in place. So that little diagram on the left-hand side of the screen, which has the pink around the outside and says working mathematically, is a figure that kind of shows what's in our brand new syllabus. It's sort of similar to our old syllabus, but the way things are broken up are a little bit different. So around the outside, you'll see working mathematically, and that means that it's embedded in everything we do. So we want kids to be reasoning, we want them to be communicating mathematically using mathematical language, and we want them to be justifying and explaining their thinking. So mathematics has changed a little bit, probably since, well, certainly since I was at school and possibly since you were at school. A lot of you are probably younger than me. But rather than focusing on things like rote learning and just knowing how to follow a procedure, we really want students to understand maths. We don't want them to just be blindly following a strategy and then coming up with an answer just because they followed that procedure that's actually incorrect and doesn't even make sense. So we do find sometimes kids, once they learn something like an algorithm, they get really good at following that procedure, but they'll use an algorithm for something that doesn't make sense to use an algorithm for. So we want to be looking at the efficiency of the methods we use as well, and making sure that our answers actually make sense. So I know that in the past when I've taught stage 3, for example, if you asked a question like 1,000 or 1,001 minus, a teen number, you'll see kids start doing an algorithm, and they're attempting to cross out zeros and take things away within those, and, borrowing, paying back, which is what we used to call it. It's a little bit different now. But really, if they had a good number sense, they would know that actually subtracting from that number is really simple to do in your head. And a lot of mathematics is. So we really want kids, as a first port of call, seeing if they can figure out a strategy in their head, and then think about how they represent that, rather than going straight to attempting to do an algorithm, which often isn't the most efficient way. All right, so I'll get off that little bandwagon. I do get a bit excited about mathematics sometimes. So in terms of the actual syllabus, working mathematically sits around the outside and is embedded into everything. The syllabus is split into 3 strands, which is number and algebra, which covers all of the normal number things that you would expect. So counting, number before and after, fractions. As we get into stage 3, we'd be talking about area model of multiplication and division and decimals and all of those sorts of things. Obviously, we don't get to those in kindergarten. The second strand that we look at in mathematics is measurement and space. So we're looking at 2D shapes, 3D objects, looking at what we call non-spatial measure, which is time, for example. An area is in there as well. And then, of course, we've got statistics and probability, which is things like chance. What is the chance of it raining today? What is the chance that I might see a pig fly today, and that would be impossible. Maybe some kids will say it's unlikely. So those sorts of things, as well as looking at data. So, how many people have pink as their favorite color, things like that. So that's what fits into data and chance. And one of the key things in our new syllabus is really attempting to make connections between all of those strands. And that's where mathematics becomes really powerful, when we make those connections. So one of the things that Sylvania Heights has been involved in this year, and this will spread into next year, is the Primary Mathematics Specialist Teacher Project. So we put in an expression of interest at the end of last year to participate in that project. And it was quite a lengthy process of interviews, and the teachers that are involved had to put in particular applications, and we were actually selected, which is fantastic. So we have another teacher who is currently teaching in Year 4, who is the Primary Mathematics Specialist teacher on the project, and we have self-funded for me to be involved in that project as well. And that is run through the New South Wales Mathematics team. And we were one of only 30 schools in New South Wales that were chosen to do that. So there's only 36 teachers across New South Wales that's actually involved in that project. So it's a really in-depth project where there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of academic side of learning, but then a lot of practical things that we are starting to trial in our classrooms, and that will then spread across the school over the course of next year and moving into the future. So some of the things that we're learning about and starting to implement are around what we call maths mindsets. So really having that positive attitude towards maths, and really seeing maths as a problem-solving exercise that helps us to make sense of the world. We're really trying to build within the students that don't give up, I can't do it yet, which you learnt about from Mr. Hines in our wellbeing session. So that's really embedded into our mathematics teaching. We really focus on getting students to represent and explain their thinking. So often, obviously, we like the answer, but the answer is not as important as being able to represent and explain your thinking. And that's such a powerful thing to happen within a mathematics classroom, so that students, when they're sharing that thinking, it actually makes things clearer for them. They see things in ways that they've never seen before, which is fantastic. It's really important that, to make those connections between the different strands in mathematics, because although we kind of pigeonhole things, sometimes, well, when we were at school, certainly we would have learned about one bit. We might have learned about fractions that week, and then the next week we might be learning about 3D shapes, and we never kind of make the connections between those things. And mathematics is highly connected. And the other thing that we're really focusing on is building strategies within our students, and a whole range of strategies, and understanding that there's not one best way often, that there's a range of best ways, and you choose the one that makes most sense to you and works for that situation. So that's some of the things that we're working on at the moment that is starting to become embedded across our school. One of the things we're really working towards is delivering our curriculum through what we call the big ideas in number. And this comes from a researcher who's very important in mathematics, called Di Seaman, and she's doing a lot of work in New South Wales as well as in Victoria, and she's actually working with our primary school maths initiative team as well. And she talks about these key ideas, the first one being trusting the count, and I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a moment, because that's one of the key things that we have to do in kindergarten. Place value is another really key idea that children really need to understand our number system. And they don't just need it for the sake of numbers. You can't really do things like converting between measurement units if you don't understand place value. It's just such an important building block of mathematics, and we really need to make sure that kids have a great solid understanding of that in those early years, and we build on that into stage 3 and beyond. We also work on what we call multiplicative thinking. So we start off with additive thinking, and we work towards understanding numbers in groups of or as counts of. So that's not something that we focus on too much in kindergarten. We more talk about groups of and shares and things like that, but it's not really with the formal kind of multiplication or division. We look at partitioning, breaking things apart, not just numbers. We can break fractions apart and things like that. And then we move into what we call proportional reasoning in the latter stages of primary school and more so into high school. And this particular researcher suggests that these things are almost in the order that's listed on the page here. And there are certain points where we would expect students to have a particular grasp. So we really want to work on that trusting the count in kindergarten. And there's a fair bit to the idea of trusting the count, which I'm going to talk through. So one of the things that we would expect if we know that a child can trust the count is that they know that the last number that they say when they're counting items is how many there are. So, I've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 was the last number I said. That's how many pens I have. And that takes quite a lot of practice. Most students will come to school not necessarily counting things one-to-one correspondence, and that's absolutely okay. That's something that we work on when we first get to school. Lots of kids come being able to kind of count, so they might be able to say the number sequence, they might be able to count to 20 or beyond. Often they're skipping some of the teen numbers, or they're sort of doing 15, 16, 16, 17, that sort of thing. I know that's what my children did when they were preschoolers. That's perfectly normal. So we will spend a lot of time practicing that counting sequence, both forwards and backwards, and then learning that each time I say a number, that's when I am counting an item. So I might move the counter, I might move the teddy bear, and I'm counting through that. And the last number that I say is how many I've got. The other thing that's really important in trusting the count is something we call supertizing. It sounds really fancy, but it's not. All it means is that I can see how many there are without having to count. So you'll see these pictures on the top right-hand side where we've got a tens frame with 4 dots in it. we're able to look at that tens frame and know that there's 4 there. So we want children to be able to do that. And that really helps them to build what we call a mental model of a number, so they can easily visualize the number. And that's a really important skill to have. And not just in tens frames, but you are able to look at dots on a dice and know that there's 6 there because it's a mental model that you have built. You can trust that when you see 3 dots there and 3 dots there, that you know it's 6. Interestingly, knowing how many fingers we've got held up is really important as well. So there was a time where we would discourage students from using fingers, but it's actually been shown in research that using fingers to count is actually a really good strategy, particularly in the early years. It's great that we've got 10 of them when we work within a base 10 number system. So that's actually really handy. And being able to use your fingers to represent numbers is really, really helpful for subitizing, but also knowing the different ways that we can break up numbers. So part of trusting the count is knowing what it says here, that 7 is 6 and 1 more, or 1 and 6 more, or 1 less than 8. So knowing all these different ways that 7 can be made up, and you can do that with your fingers. I know that 7 is 5 and 2 more, for example. So they're really important foundational things that we need to do in kindergarten to build really solid mental models of numbers to 10 so that we can break them apart. We know what they look like, so that when we start moving into addition and subtraction of larger numbers, we have that solid understanding, so that if we're doing 52 plus some other number, or maybe 28, I know that 8 and 2 go together because I know, and that they make 10 because I spent all that time in kindergarten knowing what that looks like. So that's really important. Knowing those mental models in a range of different ways, not just tens frames, not just fingers, not just dice, lots of different ways. And it doesn't matter what those things are. It can be dots. It could be lollies. When I've got 5 lollies, it's the same as having 5 cars. I've still got 5 of something. It doesn't matter what they are. When I've got, 5 counters on the table, but I move where they are, they're no longer set up as a dice pattern, I still have 5 counters. So they're really important foundational concepts to build upon within mathematics. And then once we have a really good solid understanding of those numbers to 10 and all the different ways they can be broken up and all the different ways I can make 10, we then start moving into those teen numbers, and we start working on knowing that 10 and 2 more is 12 and 10 and 3 more is 13, and all of those sorts of things that start building over time. So sometimes we can have students that sound like they're counting really well, but it's really important to also have all of this solid knowledge at the same time. So they might be able to count to 100, but if they don't know all the different ways that they can make 10 or the different ways that 7 can be broken up, we need to go back and fill in those gaps. So we spend a lot of time doing that and subitizing, looking at those pictures and just being able to say that's 2, that's 5, that's 6, or whatever it might be in various forms in kindergarten. Has anyone got any questions on that so far? It's always a little bit tricky just kind of talking to the screen. Okay, so how do we teach mathematics at Sylvania Heights Public School? Well, we're in a little bit of a state of change at the moment, but here's some of the things that we do, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have started to do and are working on. So we do a daily maths review, which focuses on counting, different number areas. In kindergarten, there's a lot of subitizing within there, and we review the language and prior concepts, so concepts that we've already taught in the other strands. So for example, we know that telling the time is something that just needs loads and loads of practice. So we tell the time almost every day, or at least a few times a week within our daily maths review. We know that we just need lots of practice recognizing our 2D and 3D, 2D shapes and 3D objects. So we pop that into our maths review. So once we've done an explicit lesson on learning about those things, we don't just kind of leave that lesson and, a term later we've forgotten everything. We come back and regularly review things so that we're able to build over time. But there's certainly a huge focus on counting and subitizing within our daily maths review. We also do a thing called Number Talks, which is something that comes from the research. And a number talk can, depending on how you do it, it can look quite different. But essentially, you might put up a picture with or a number, or, in the later grades, we might have a number sentence, and students attempt to solve or share their thinking or what they see verbally. So it's really about the mental strategies building. So in kindergarten, that might be actually putting up a dot pattern really early on, and you might have 4 or 5 on one side and 3 more, or you might have them all kind of mixed up, and then we will share how we saw it. How did we count it? So what we're starting to do is actually group those dots together. So we're not counting all of them one by one, but we might say, well, I saw 4 over there because it looked a little bit like a dice pattern. And then I saw 3 more over there, and I went 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're getting kids to verbalize how they saw something. And then we build on that. And over time, we start looking at strategies that we might have used to do multiplication. So by stage 3, it will look different, but the actual process of sharing that thinking and talking about efficient strategies stays in place. So it's really getting students to get used to talking about their thinking. So you will find sometimes when you ask a child, well, how did you know the answer was blah? And they'll say, my brain just told me. What we try to do in Number Talks is almost cut open their brain and find out what it is their brain actually said to them when they were trying to work it out, because we want to know what strategies they're using. We want to know whether they split the number or they remembered that 7 was 5 and 2 more. So we have to kind of break that apart and get the kids to talk about it and do that reasoning. And you'll remember that working mathematically was that area that went right around our maths curriculum, and Number Talks is a really great way to get kids to work and communicate mathematically. One of the other things we do, we follow a launch, explore, summarize model. So that's something that we are starting to do, and it's something that we've learnt throughout our maths project with the New South Wales strategy team. So what happens in that, we will launch what we call a problem or an engaging task, and we let kids struggle with it for a little while so that they're really engaged and we're seeing what it is that they're wondering and thinking. Then we might do some teaching around what they need, and we explore it and we get out concrete items and we make things. And then we bring the maths together. So we really try and make the maths concrete. So they're doing and touching and manipulating things, because we know in the early years that that's actually how we learn maths best. So rather than sort of writing number sums and things like that, which is a really abstract concept, we want kids to actually understand what maths is. And they tend to do that quite naturally because kids are really curious about the real world. So if we can harness that in the early years, then we will have a lot of success in teaching mathematics. And you can see here this picture of the sand and the shells. It's a really good example of how we can, in everyday life, look at maths. So, we can see that 2 things are the same. We can group things together. We can sort them. We can make a pattern with them. So there's lots of opportunities in the real world to explore mathematics. Games are really important in maths as well. They're super engaging for kids, and they're actually really good for building fluency. So we do play a lot of games and, do songs and all of those sorts of things within a mathematics classroom in kindergarten. We do set some maths homework in kindergarten as well. At the moment, that is in the form of mathletics. It might look a little bit different next year, but we're really keen for you to be doing hands-on things with your kids in terms of maths at home. So just like in literacy, vocabulary is really super important. So we need to build up that mathematical language. And this is something that you can start doing now, and you probably already are. So things like comparing which one's bigger, which one's smaller, I've got more, you've got less, we've got the same amount. That sort of language is a really important start to talking about maths. The same as positional language. So that's above, that's below, I sat beside. The teddy is in between the 2 other toys. Those sorts of things are really helpful to start doing now as well. You'll find that kids already know a little bit about sharing because they really understand when it's not a fair share. They know when their brother got more than they did. They know when they didn't get a half, it was kind of half, but one half was actually bigger. So therefore it's not half and I've been ripped off. They're really aware of that. So we can build on that real life understanding that they already have. And of course, patterns, being able to describe which thing came first and even describing the shapes of things. That's all important early maths. And so just like in literacy, the children who are around all of those complex conversations have an advantage. So just talking to your kids about maths, and they won't even realise, is a really great way to get started. And it's interesting as well. So one of the things that happens is we almost take the joy out of mathematics when we go through school, particularly when we get into high school. It's a real shame that, you know, kids are naturally curious in those early years, and they quite enjoy maths and the building and the moving things around and developing that understanding. But unfortunately, that love of maths sometimes wanes. So we're really trying to work on keeping that love and that curiosity around numbers and around how things work and seeing those connections. All right. So what are some things that you can do at home? Well, counting. Count everything. Practice counting in the car, practice that counting forwards, counting backwards is really helpful. So just understanding that number sequence is really helpful. And again, if they're not quite getting those teen numbers yet, it's not the end of the world. It's really common. Have a go at counting items with one-to-one correspondence, but don't panic if they can't yet, because that's something we work on in kindergarten. But that, you know, you might work with your child saying, oh, let's count how many teddies you've got. That might lead to a conversation about you having too many teddies that some might need to go. So you can count anything. You could count the forks, you could count the pegs, you know, you could count how many red pegs I've got. So just count all the time is really great. Notice and talk about patterns, and those patterns could be anywhere. It could be patterns on curtains. It could be patterns on a bag. It doesn't necessarily have to be one square, one circle, one square, one circle, but get them to notice that there's patterns everywhere and talk about them. Singing and reciting number-related rhymes is really great. Comparing amounts, so you've got more, I had less, there's more in my cup, there's less in your cup, we've got the same amount, the cup's full, the cup's empty. All of those things are actually examples of maths language that we start looking at in kindergarten. Talk about the fair shares, talk about halves, that it's not actually a half unless they're equal shares. That's something that we work on in kindergarten. So all of these things are things that you can start talking about, but we will be working on next year. So don't panic if they don't get it straight away. We wouldn't expect them to, but you can just kind of plant that seed. One of the really nice things to be doing with your preschoolers is cooking, because you can talk about how much you have in a container. You know, I need a full container of that. I need a cup of that. You're not necessarily showing them formal measurements, you know, like meals and so on, but you can certainly talk about, you know, I had to put in more flour than water. You know, I needed 2 eggs for that recipe, those sorts of things. And, you know, kids really love pouring. So you could, when you're doing your water play, you know, which container should I use to fill up that big container? Which one's going to be the easiest? Or how many of these little containers of water do you think I need to fill up this big container? So those sorts of things. So lots and lots of play will help in just developing maths as well. Games, particularly those involving dice, will help develop the subitizing. So we do find that a lot of kids come to school already knowing and recognizing the dice patterns, which is helpful. So that's something that you can do. You know, initially they might count them, but over time they'll actually understand, oh, I know when I see that particular dice pattern that I know it's 5 or I know it's 3. And so that's a really good start as well. So things like snakes and ladders, which involves counting as well as the dice, is really good too. Another thing that I would recommend you do if you're interested is to go and check out the Everyday Maths Hub, which has been put together by the New South Wales Maths Strategy team, who I've been working with. And they have a whole bunch of ideas that you can do or to use at home to talk about maths in the everyday, because we don't want students thinking that maths is just numbers that I do at school. We want them to really make that connection to maths being in the real world, and actually it helps me to make sense of the world. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, numeracy. So as you know, at Sylvania Heights Public School, every child is known, cared for and valued. And again, we really hope that you see that within what we present in these sessions, when you speak to our beautiful office staff and when you come into the school tomorrow. We really care about our kids. We worry about their well-being. We worry about how they're going. We really want every single child that comes to our school to be successful. And we really work on making sure that we are providing quality teaching that's based on research to make sure that every learner is successful. So I hope that you really feel that from our school. So if you would like to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to take those. They don't necessarily have to relate to numeracy. You might have some other questions that have come up as well. Okay, Jessica, I can see that you've asked, does the school use math seeds and reading eggs? So currently we do use reading eggs and we use mathletics. We're currently reviewing what we're going to be using moving forward. One of the things that we purchased, or we had purchased this year, was something called Decodable Readers Australia, which are decodable books that are matched with our sequence that we teach phonics. So, and they're essentially online home readers that can be used to support what we are doing at school. So that is something that we would like to continue into next year. We started that during COVID learning, but it's something that we will probably put in place at the beginning of next year as well. We are still deciding whether we're going to continue with reading eggs or mathletics. There's a whole bunch of online programs that are available, and I think it's really important to regularly review what we're using and make sure that it actually matches what we're teaching. So we'll give you some more information about which online programs we intend to use next year. I hope that answered that question. Any other questions? I'm happy for you to pop your microphone on if you would like to, and I'm going to stop sharing. Is there anything else that anyone would like to ask?
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you. All your sessions have been really informative.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that it's been useful.
Thank you.
Okay, so as usual, we will post a recording so that if there's anything that you want to come back to, that will be available. But we'll run some more information sessions next year, because often what happens once you actually come, the children are actually at school, new questions arise, and you know, I'd really like to make sure that you have a really great understanding on what you can do at home, you know, to back up what we're doing within the classroom, particularly in reading and in numeracy as well. So we'll spend some time on that next year. Hopefully we'll be able to actually have you come into the school, which would be lovely. Okay, so tomorrow, just for your information, we do have the staggered start, which you know about. We are encouraging you, and I will send out a note tomorrow just to sort of remind everyone what's happening. I probably recommend you come in the Venetia Street or the Lisbon Street gates, the main kind of two gates that come into the middle of the school. And we'll be meeting under what we call the MPC, which is the big shaded area, which you may have seen. It's kind of right in the middle of the school, and you'll need to just check in and we're going to hand you a bit of a goodies bag, and then we'll be asking the parents to leave. So within there, we will find that we will kind of get the kids to sit down, and then we will be taking them off to the classrooms. So we've got a lot of teachers that will be around tomorrow to assist with that process. We understand that it will be a little bit tricky because you'll be leaving your child and with us. I promise we'll look after them, and then we'll be asking you to leave the school so the next group can come in, and we have to do that just because of the COVID restrictions. So ordinarily we'd love for you to stay in the school, but we're just not able to do that this time. So hopefully next year. Just checking that chat again. Okay, just thank you. Thanks, guys. Okay, yep. So if you do have a child that's unwell tomorrow, thank you for keeping them home. We will do something in its place. So I'm going to think out loud a little bit. We might be able to do something, even possibly a Zoom with your child if that's the case, just to sort of get them familiar with our school and our classrooms. But hopefully every child will be able to come to at least one of the transition sessions. But of course, if your child is unwell, please don't come tomorrow. We will put something else in place to make sure that they feel like they know what's going on. And feel welcome and ready to go. Any other questions? Okay, we might leave it there. Again, if anything does come up, please just pop it into our kindergarten Facebook page. We're happy to answer. Sorry if I'm a little bit slow sometimes getting to those. I know some people, sorry, just on that, have been asking about Best Start. We haven't sent out the information about Best Start times yet. That will come a little bit later in the term, which is really only in the next couple of weeks. And you'll be given an assigned time. If for whatever reason you can't make that time, if you could just let the office know and we can swap that around and help you with that. I think someone else also asked what their child wears to the Best Start. You can just wear plain clothes. We do get some children who are just super excited and want to wear their uniform. That's okay. It's fine if you want to do that, but most children come in their just their plain clothes. That session does not take a huge amount of time. So it'll be one-on-one with a teacher, the child with the teacher. Usually we have the parents wait in a particular spot. It might be outside the office or in a room, depending on COVID. And that's a one-on-one interview, just looking at numeracy and literacy skills. And we use that information along with the observations from transition to help form classes. But do be aware that we also look at the children when they first start school over the first few days to make decisions around who's going to be best where. We look at the needs of the students. We obviously want a mix of sort of quieter and louder students, and more confident, less confident, and try and get that balance and mix right. So we do take our time getting those classes in place, and we swap around the teachers just so that we have a really good understanding of the students that we have across the board before we make decisions on which children will go into which class, so that their best meets the needs of those students. All right, I might leave it there. Thanks for your time tonight, and thank you for attending the sessions that we have provided. At this stage, it looks like there will be 3 classes next year, but anything could change. But we look pretty much bang on 3 classes, okay? But a lot can change. All right. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see most of you tomorrow. Okay, bye then.